The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like mechanical bees, casting their harsh white glow across the sprawling electronics superstore. Tech World Mega Center stretched across 40,000 square feet of polished concrete floors, its towering. Shelves lined with the latest smartphones, gaming consoles, laptops, and smart home devices that promised to revolutionize daily life. The store's layout was a carefully orchestrated maze designed to guide customers through every department, maximizing their exposure to impulse purchases and high-margin accessories. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Located in the heart of suburban Atlanta, this flagship location served as the crown jewel of the Tech World chain. Glass display cases housed premium devices worth thousands of dollars, their screens perpetually cycling through promotional videos and product demonstrations. The gaming section buzzed with the constant soundtrack of virtual battles and electronic melodies, while the home theater department showcased massive televisions, displaying crystal-clear nature documentaries that made customers pause and wonder. The scenes, corporations had implemented what they called customer engagement protocols. These weren't officially written policies, but rather unspoken practices that had evolved over years of retail experience. Loss prevention took priority above all else, and certain assumptions had become embedded in the store's culture. Employees were trained to watch for suspicious behavior, but the definition of suspicious had gradually become distorted by unconscious bias. The morning shift briefing had been typical. Regional Manager Bradley Hawkins, a thick-set man in his early 50s with graying temples and wire-rimmed glasses, addressed his team with the same stern efficiency he'd perfected over 15 years in retail management. He'd climbed the corporate ladder through aggressive sales tactics and an unwavering focus on shrinkage prevention. His office walls displayed numerous Manager of the Quarter plaques, alongside framed photos of him shaking hands with corporate executives. "Remember, people," Bradley had announced to the gathered employees, "the holiday shopping season is approaching, and that means increased foot traffic. We need eyes everywhere. Watch for grab-and-run tactics, distraction techniques, and anyone who seems to be casing our high-value merchandise. Trust your instincts, and don't hesitate to call security if something feels off." The assembled staff nodded in understanding. They'd heard variations of this speech countless times, and most genuinely believed they were protecting the store's assets through vigilant observation. Few questioned whether their instincts might be clouded by implicit assumptions about who posed a threat and who didn't. The store's demographic had shifted over the years as the surrounding neighborhood evolved. What had once been a predominantly white suburban area now reflected greater diversity, with young professionals of all backgrounds drawn to the area's growing tech sector. However, the store's policies and cultural attitudes hadn't evolved at the same pace as its customer base. Security cameras positioned throughout the store captured every angle, their feeds monitored from a control room where two part-time security guards tracked movement patterns and flagged unusual behavior. The system was sophisticated, utilizing motion detection and facial recognition software that corporate claimed was colorblind, but somehow seemed to generate more alerts for certain customers than others. The electronics department itself was a testament to modern consumer culture. Customers could test drive the latest virtual reality headsets, experience surround sound systems that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and explore smart home ecosystems that promise to anticipate their every need. Sales associates roamed the floor with tablets, ready to process transactions on the spot or check inventory in the warehouse that stretched behind the retail space. During peak hours, the store became a symphony of electronic sounds, notification chimes from demonstration phones, the whir of cooling fans from high-end gaming computers, the synthetic voices of digital assistants responding to voice commands, and the constant beeping of barcode scanners at the checkout counters. The cacophony was punctuated by overhead announcements, promoting daily specials and reminding customers about extended warranty options. The breakroom conversations often revealed the underlying tensions that corporate policies tried to mask. Employees would share stories about suspicious customers they'd observed, using coded language that everyone understood, but no one questioned. These narratives reinforced existing biases and created an echo chamber where discriminatory practices were normalized under the guise of loss prevention. Outside, the parking lot stretched across several acres, with designated spaces for electric vehicle charging stations that reflected the store's attempt to appeal to environmentally conscious consumers. The building's exterior featured sleek glass panels and LED signage that created an impressive nighttime display visible from the nearby interstate. Corporate had invested heavily in creating an image of technological sophistication and customer service excellence. The store's employee handbook contained carefully worded policies about treating all customers with respect and dignity, but the practical training focused primarily on sales techniques and security protocols. New hires received modules on reading customer behavior and identifying potential theft indicators that, while not explicitly discriminatory, often led to biased implementation in practice. Regional metrics measured everything: sales per square foot, conversion rates, average transaction values, and shrinkage percentages. Store managers faced intense pressure to optimize these numbers, and loss prevention had become increasingly aggressive as corporate demanded better results. The human element of retail interaction had gradually given way to data-driven decision making that often overlooked the personal dignity of individual customers. The Wednesday afternoon shift was typically quieter than evenings and weekends, with foot traffic consisting mainly of retirees, remote workers, and people conducting specific shopping missions rather than leisurely browsing. The reduced crowd made it easier for staff to observe individual customers and track their movement. Through the store's various departments. Technology demonstrations ran continuously on loop, showcasing everything from artificial intelligence applications to home automation systems. Interactive displays invited customers to experience products firsthand, but certain merchandise remained locked behind glass cases, accessible only through employee assistance. This created natural interaction points between staff and customers, moments where assumptions and biases could either build bridges or create barriers. The store's atmosphere reflected broader tensions in American retail culture, where the desire to create welcoming shopping experiences competed with concerns about security and profitability. Corporate training emphasized customer service, but operational pressures often pushed employees toward suspicious vigilance rather than genuine hospitality. As the afternoon wore on, the store maintained its usual rhythm of quiet efficiency. Employees restocked shelves, processed returns, and assisted customers with technical questions. The public address system occasionally announced special promotions or reminded customers about the store's price-matching policy. Everything appeared normal on the surface, a typical day in the life of a modern electronics retailer. But beneath this veneer of routine operation, the stage was set for an encounter that would challenge every assumption about customer profiling, corporate authority, and the true cost of discrimination in American retail. The carefully maintained balance between security and service was about to be tested in ways that would expose the ugly reality behind polished corporate policies. The fluorescent lights continued their mechanical humming. The security cameras maintained their silent watch, and the employees went about their duties with practiced efficiency. None of them could have predicted that this ordinary Wednesday afternoon would become a turning point that would ripple through the entire tech world corporate structure, forcing uncomfortable conversations about bias, dignity, and the true meaning of customer service in the 21st century. The automatic doors parted with a soft whoosh as Dr. Camille Washington stepped into the cool, humming atmosphere of Tech World Mega Center. She moved with deliberate calm, her footsteps barely audible, against the polished concrete floor despite the steady rhythm of her practical black sneakers. At first glance, she appeared to be just another afternoon shopper, a woman in her early 40s wearing dark jeans, a simple navy cardigan over a white cotton t-shirt, and carrying a worn leather messenger bag across her shoulder. Her natural hair was pulled back into a low bun, secured with a plain black elastic band, and she wore no makeup save for a subtle lip balm that caught the fluorescent light occasionally. A pair of reading glasses hung from a simple chain around her neck, and her only visible jewelry was a modest silver watch with a well-worn leather strap. Everything about her appearance suggested someone who prioritized comfort and functionality over fashion statements, but there were details that might catch the attention of a careful observer. The way she paused just inside the entrance, not with the overwhelmed hesitation of someone unfamiliar with technology stores, but with the assessing gaze of someone evaluating systems and processes. Her eyes moved systematically across the store layout, noting the placement of security cameras, the flow of customer traffic, and the positioning of staff members throughout the various departments. She walked with the confident posture of someone accustomed to commanding rooms filled with brilliant minds, though this authority was carefully understated in her current civilian attire. Her hands, when she reached out to examine a display model tablet, moved with the precise touch of someone intimately familiar with advanced technology. The way she navigated the touchscreen interface revealed muscle memory that came from years of working with cutting-edge devices. Camille's messenger bag, though weathered and unpretentious, was crafted from premium Italian leather that would cost several $100s if purchased new. Inside, carefully organized in padded compartments, were tools that would surprise most casual observers. A prototype smartphone that wouldn't be released to consumers for another 18 months, a tablet computer running experimental software, and a collection of technical specifications printed on paper, bearing the letterhead of major tech corporations. As she moved deeper into the store, her behavior pattern emerged. She wasn't browsing casually or following the intended customer flow designed by corporate planners. Instead, she moved with purpose toward specific product categories, spending concentrated time examining particular devices and making quiet notes on her phone. To untrained eyes, this might appear suspicious, someone potentially casing merchandise for theft. To more perceptive observers, it would suggest someone with deep technical knowledge conducting professional research. She paused at the smartphone display, picking up the latest flagship model from a major manufacturer. Her fingers moved across the device with practiced efficiency, navigating to system information screens that most customers never accessed. She examined the processor specifications, checked the camera sensor details, and tested the fingerprint recognition system with the methodical approach of someone who understood the underlying technology intimately. A young sales associate named Kevin, barely out of college with spiky hair and enthusiasm that hadn't yet been worn down by retail reality, approached with genuine helpfulness. "Can I answer any questions about our phone selection? That model you're holding is our top seller this quarter." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Camille looked up with a warm smile that transformed her serious demeanor. "It's impressive. Engineering. The neural processing unit integration is particularly elegant. How has customer feedback been regarding battery life under high computational loads?" Kevin blinked, clearly not expecting such a technical question. Most people say the battery lasts all day with normal use. Are you looking for something specific for work?" "Something like that," Camille replied diplomatically, continuing her examination. She tested the device's multitasking capabilities, opened developer options that Kevin didn't even know existed, and conducted what appeared to be performance benchmarking using apps that weren't available in the standard App Store. Her next stop was the laptop section, where she spent considerable time examining business-grade models that cost several $1,000s. She opened multiple units, tested their keyboards with the rapid typing of someone who spent hours daily on similar devices, and evaluated their display quality with an expert eye for color accuracy and pixel density. Her assessments were thorough and systematic, the kind of evaluation typically conducted by professional reviewers or procurement specialists for large organizations. The gaming section drew her attention next, though not for the reasons most customers visited that area. She examined the graphics processing units powering the demonstration systems, noted the cooling solutions implemented in various gaming rigs, and tested the latency of high refresh rate monitors. Her technical questions to the gaming specialist revealed knowledge that went far beyond casual interest in video games. Throughout her exploration, Camille maintained an air of polite professionalism with staff members who approached her. She answered their questions with friendly brevity while revealing nothing substantial about her background or intentions. When asked about her budget or intended use cases, she provided vague responses that satisfied immediate curiosity without offering real information. From across the store, Bradley Hawkins had begun to take notice. His 15 years of retail management experience had taught him to spot patterns, and something about this customer triggered his alert systems. She didn't fit the profile of typical afternoon shoppers. Her examination of merchandise was too systematic, too knowledgeable, and too focused on high-value items. She moved through the store like someone conducting surveillance rather than shopping. Bradley's observations were filtered through years of unconscious bias training that had taught him to associate certain customer behaviors with potential theft. The systematic way Camille examined products, her reluctance to provide personal information to sales associates, and her apparent expertise with expensive technology all registered as warning signs in his mental checklist of suspicious activities. Positioned himself strategically near the store's central customer service desk, where he could maintain visual contact with Camille while appearing to conduct normal managerial duties. He shuffled through inventory reports and checked staff schedules, but his primary attention remained focused on tracking her movement through the store. Camille, aware of being observed but accustomed to scrutiny from her professional life, continued her methodical evaluation of TechWorld's product selection. She examined smart home devices, testing voice recognition accuracy and evaluating the responsiveness of various automation systems. Her questions to department specialists revealed understanding of network protocols, data encryption standards, and compatibility requirements that surprised even experienced sales staff. At the virtual reality section, she spent nearly 20 minutes testing different headset models. She evaluated display resolution, field of view, tracking accuracy, and motion-to-photon latency with the critical eye of someone who understood the technology's potential and limitations intimately. Her assessment went beyond typical consumer concerns about game selection or comfort, focusing instead on technical specifications that most customers never considered. The smartwatch display captured her attention for an extended period. She examined the sensor arrays, tested biometric accuracy, and evaluated the device's integration with various smartphone ecosystems. Her familiarity with the underlying technology was evident in how quickly she navigated through advanced settings and diagnostic screens that required technical knowledge to access. As the afternoon progressed, Camille's behavior pattern remained consistent. She approached each product category with scientific curiosity, asking informed questions that often pushed sales associates beyond their comfort zones. Her examination of merchandise was thorough but respectful. She handled expensive devices with appropriate care while extracting maximum information about their capabilities and limitations. Her messenger bag remained securely closed throughout her exploration, and she made no attempt to conceal her examination of products. Everything about her behavior was transparent and professional, yet her systematic approach and technical expertise created an impression of someone with an agenda. Beyond casual shopping, the contrast between her unremarkable appearance and her obvious technical sophistication created cognitive dissonance for observers like Bradley, who had learned to make quick judgments about customer intentions based on superficial characteristics. Her modest clothing and practical accessories suggested someone unlikely to purchase expensive electronics, while her behavior indicated deep familiarity with advanced technology. This contradiction fed into existing biases about who belonged in spaces dedicated to high-end consumer electronics. The assumption that technical expertise correlated with specific demographic characteristics led to misinterpretation of Camille's professional competence as potentially suspicious behavior. As she concluded her examination of the audio equipment section, testing headphones that cost more than many people's monthly rent and evaluating sound systems with audiophile precision, Camille remained unaware that her innocent professional research was being interpreted through the lens of discriminatory assumptions about criminal intent. The stage was set for a confrontation rooted in prejudice, masquerading as security consciousness, where professional competence would be misread as criminal behavior, and where the true power dynamics of the situation remained hidden beneath assumptions about appearance and belonging. Bradley Hawkins had seen enough. After 45 minutes of observation, his suspicions had crystallized into certainty. This woman wasn't a legitimate customer. She was conducting reconnaissance for a sophisticated theft operation. Her systematic examination of high-value merchandise, her reluctance to provide personal information to sales staff, and her obvious technical expertise all pointed to one conclusion. In his biased mind, she was a professional criminal casing the store for a future heist. He straightened his tie and smoothed down his corporate polo shirt, preparing for what he'd considered a necessary intervention. Bradley had built his reputation on preventing shrinkage, and he wasn't about to let a potential theft ring gather intelligence on his watch. The regional quarterly meeting was next week, and he needed strong security metrics to present to corporate leadership. "Excuse me, miss." Bradley's voice cut through the ambient electronic buzz as he approached Camille near the high-end audio equipment section. His tone carried the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I'm Bradley Hawkins, the regional manager here. I need to have a word with you." Camille looked up from the professional mixing board she'd been examining, her expression shifting from focused concentration to polite curiosity. She set down the expensive equipment with careful precision, giving Bradley her full attention. "Of course, how can I help you?" Bradley's jaw tightened slightly. He'd expected nervousness, defensiveness, or immediate compliance, not this calm professionalism that somehow made him feel off balance. "I've been watching you for the past hour, and I have some concerns about your behavior in our store." "Concerns?" Camille's eyebrows rose slightly, but her voice remained level and pleasant. "What kind of concerns?" "You've been examining our merchandise very intensively," Bradley continued, his confidence building as he settled into his prepared script. "You're asking technical questions that go beyond normal customer interest, and you're spending an unusual amount of time with our most expensive products. That raises red flags for us." Camille nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his perspective. "I can understand how thoroughness might seem unusual. I prefer to research purchases carefully before making decisions." "Is there a store policy against examining merchandise?" The reasonable tone of her response irritated Bradley more than outright defiance would have. He'd expected her to become flustered or defensive, giving him clear justification for escalating the situation. Instead, she was treating this like a rational business discussion, which made his suspicions seem less credible to the staff members who were beginning to take notice. "It's not about policy," Bradley said, his voice taking on a harder edge. It's about common sense. Normal customers don't spend 45 minutes testing equipment they can't afford. Normal customers don't ask our specialists about processor architectures and network protocols. Normal customers aren't taking notes on their phones about our security camera placement. I wasn't taking notes about your security cameras, Camille replied calmly, though a slight frown creased her forehead. I was making technical notes about product specifications for comparison purposes. As for affordability, I haven't indicated what my budget might be. Bradley felt his face flush with irritation. This woman was being deliberately obtuse, playing innocent when her intentions were obviously suspicious. Listen, I've been in this business for 15 years. I know the difference between a genuine customer and someone who's casing our store. Your behavior fits a pattern we've seen before. Several customers had stopped their shopping to observe the unfolding confrontation. Kevin, the young sales associate who had helped Camille earlier, lingered nearby with obvious discomfort. He'd found her technical knowledge impressive rather than suspicious, and Bradley's aggressive approach seemed disproportionate to anything he'd witnessed. What pattern would that be? Camille asked, her tone still controlled but with a subtle shift that suggested growing concern about the direction of the conversation. Bradley gestured broadly at the surrounding displays. Systematic examination of high-value merchandise. Unusual technical expertise. Reluctance to provide personal information. Extended time in the store without making purchases. Taking detailed notes on your phone. These are all classic indicators of theft reconnaissance, or indicators of someone who takes technology purchases seriously, Camille countered, her voice remaining level despite the increasingly public nature of their conversation. I'm sorry if my shopping style doesn't match your expectations, but I haven't violated any store policies or engaged in any suspicious behavior. The calm reasonableness of her response only fueled Bradley's frustration. In his experience, innocent people became defensive when confronted. Guilty people either fled or became aggressive. This woman's continued professionalism struck him as calculated manipulation, a sophisticated attempt to deflect legitimate security concerns. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification, Bradley announced, loud enough for the growing circle of observers to hear clearly. Store policy requires us to verify identity when suspicious behavior is reported. Camille's composure flickered for the first time, a brief flash of something surprise, indignation, crossing her features before settling back into controlled professionalism. That's not accurate. I've reviewed your store policies online, and customer identification is only required for returns, certain warranty services, or age-restricted purchases. I haven't requested any of those services. Bradley's face darkened. This woman was not only refusing to cooperate, she was challenging his authority in front of staff and customers. His years of unchallenged managerial power hadn't prepared him for someone who knew policy better than he did and refused to be intimidated by his position. Don't lecture me about my own store's policies, he snapped, his professional veneer beginning to crack. I have the authority to request identification from anyone exhibiting suspicious behavior on these premises. Actually, you don't, Camille replied quietly, but her voice carried clearly in the suddenly hushed electronic section. Private businesses can request identification, but customers have no legal obligation to provide it unless they're attempting age-restricted purchases or specific services that require identity verification. Shopping while knowledgeable isn't a crime. The accuracy of her legal knowledge infuriated Bradley further. She was making him look foolish in front of his own staff, undermining his authority with precise corrections that he couldn't dispute. Worse, her calm demeanor made his increasingly aggressive tone seem unreasonable by comparison. Fine, Bradley soughed, his voice taking on a threatening quality. If you won't cooperate voluntarily, I'll have to assume you have something to hide. I'm calling security to escort you from the premises. Camille straightened slightly, her posture shifting from casual to formally erect. For the first time since the confrontation began, something resembling steel entered her voice. On what grounds? I've violated no laws, broken no store policies, and engaged in no threatening behavior. You're asking me to leave because I examined your merchandise carefully and asked informed questions. I'm asking you to leave because your behavior is suspicious and disruptive to our business operations, Bradley replied, reaching for his radio to call security. And if you refuse to leave voluntarily, we'll consider that trespassing. The word trespassing created a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Other customers began moving away from the confrontation, and staff members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Kevin looked like he wanted to intervene, but didn't know how to challenge his regional manager's authority. Mr. Hawkins, Camille said, and for the first time, she used his name with a tone that suggested she had been paying more attention to his earlier introduction than he'd realized. I think you should be very careful about the accusations you're making and the actions you're considering. There was something in her voice, not quite a threat, but a quality of authority that hadn't been there before. Bradley noticed it but misinterpreted it as the desperation of someone whose cover had been blown. In his mind, she was finally dropping the innocent act and revealing her true nature. Are you threatening me? Bradley demanded, raising his voice enough to draw attention from customers throughout the surrounding departments. Because that would be grounds for criminal charges in addition to trespassing. I'm not threatening anyone, Camille replied, her voice returning to its previous calm tone. I'm suggesting that you might want to reconsider whether your suspicions are based on my actual behavior or on assumptions that could prove problematic. The carefully chosen word problematic hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Bradley couldn't quite decode but found deeply irritating. She was still playing games, still trying to manipulate the situation with fancy words and legal technicalities. Security to electronics, Bradley spoke into his radio, his eyes never leaving Camille's face. We have a suspicious individual who needs escort assistance. As the crackling response acknowledged his call, Bradley felt a surge of satisfaction. This confrontation was finally moving in a direction he could control. Security would back up his authority, this disruptive customer would be removed, and normal business operations could resume. He'd prevented what could have been a sophisticated theft operation, and corporate would surely recognize his proactive security management. Camille remained motionless during his radio call, watching his face with an expression that was becoming increasingly difficult for Bradley to read. There was no fear, no anger, no defiance, just careful observation, as if she were studying his behavior for future reference. You're making a mistake, she said quietly, once Bradley had finished his radio communication. The only mistake would be letting you continue to case our store, Bradley replied confidently. I've been protecting retail establishments from people like you for 15 years. I know exactly what I'm doing. People like me, Camille repeated, her voice carefully neutral. What exactly do you mean by that, Mr. Hawkins? Bradley realized he'd walked into verbal territory that could be problematic if misinterpreted. People who engage in suspicious behavior. People who don't belong in establishments like this. People who, he caught himself before completing the thought, but not before everyone present understood the implication. The atmosphere in the electronics section had grown tense, with staff members and customers alike sensing that the confrontation had taken on dimensions beyond simple security concerns. Some observers looked uncomfortable with Bradley's increasingly aggressive tactics, while others seemed to support his decisive action against what they perceived as a potential threat. As the sound of security personnel approaching echoed through the store's public address system, Camille reached into her messenger bag, not frantically or furtively, but with deliberate calm. Bradley tensed, ready to call out a warning about weapon concerns, but she withdrew only her smartphone. "Before your security team arrives," Camille said, holding the device where Bradley could see it clearly, "I think I should make a phone call." The approach of heavy footsteps echoed through the electronic section as two security guards made their way across the polished concrete floor. Marcus Thompson, the senior security officer, was a former military police veteran whose imposing 6'3" frame had been shaped by years of disciplined service. His partner, Jennifer Chun, was newer to the security field, but had earned respect through her sharp observational skills and calm professionalism under pressure. Both wore the standard Tech World security uniforms, black polo shirts with company logos and utility belts equipped with radios, flashlights, and restraint tools. Bradley felt a surge of vindication as his security team arrived. This was exactly the kind of situation that validated his aggressive loss prevention policies. Corporate headquarters always emphasized the importance of proactive security measures, and removing suspicious individuals before they could execute their plans was textbook retail protection protocol. "What's the situation, Mr. Hawkins?" Marcus asked, his deep voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to de-escalating tense situations. His eyes moved systematically between Bradley and Camille, taking in body language and environmental factors with trained precision. "This individual has been engaging in suspicious reconnaissance behavior for over an hour," Bradley explained, his confidence building with backup present. "Systematic examination of high-value merchandise, unusual technical questioning, note-taking, and refusing to provide identification when requested. Classic theft preparation patterns." Marcus nodded professionally, but his experienced eyes were already noting details that didn't quite fit Bradley's narrative. Camille stood calmly with her hands visible, showing no signs of nervous behavior or preparation for flight. Her posture suggested someone accustomed to dealing with authority figures, rather than someone caught in criminal activity. Her clothing was modest but clean and professional, not the typical attire of someone planning retail theft. "Ma'am," Marcus addressed Camille directly, his tone respectful but firm, "can you tell me about your activities in the store today?" "I've been evaluating various electronic products for potential purchase," Camille replied clearly, her voice carrying to the growing circle of observers. "I've examined smartphones, laptops, audio equipment, and smart home devices. I've asked technical questions of your sales staff and made notes about specifications for comparison purposes. I haven't violated any store policies or engaged in any threatening behavior." Jennifer Chun stepped forward, her notebook ready to document the interaction. "Have you been taking photographs of merchandise or store layout?" "No photographs," Camille answered promptly. "Only notes about product specifications, features, and pricing for personal research purposes." Bradley's frustration mounted as he watched the security team conduct what appeared to be a reasonable investigation rather than immediately supporting his assessment of the situation. "She's being deliberately evasive. She won't provide identification. And she's been examining our security camera placement while pretending to shop." "I haven't examined your security cameras," Camille corrected calmly. "I've been focusing on product displays and asking sales associates about technical specifications. As for identification, I'm under no legal obligation to provide ID simply for shopping in your store." Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Jennifer. Both security professionals had dealt with enough actual theft attempts to recognize the difference between suspicious behavior and knowledgeable shopping. Nothing about Camille's demeanor suggested criminal intent, but they also had to respect their regional manager's concerns. "Mr. Hawkins," Marcus said diplomatically, "what specific actions would you like us to take?" "I want her removed from the premises for suspicious behavior and trespassing," Bradley declared, loud enough for everyone in the electronics section to hear. "She's clearly casing our store for a future theft operation, and I won't have my business compromised by professional criminals." The word "criminals" sent a ripple of reaction through the assembled crowd. Some customers moved further away from the confrontation, while others leaned in with curiosity. Several people had begun recording the interaction with their smartphones. Sensing that something significant was unfolding, Camille's expression shifted subtly, a barely perceptible tightening around her eyes that suggested the accusation had crossed a line. For the first time since the confrontation began, her composure showed hairline cracks. "Mr. Hawkins," she said, her voice still controlled but carrying a new edge of steel, "you're making very serious accusations based on no evidence whatsoever. I'm a legitimate customer engaging in normal shopping behavior. Your characterization of my actions as criminal is both inaccurate and potentially defamatory." The legal terminology struck Bradley like a challenge. This woman was not only refusing to be intimidated, she was threatening him with legal consequences for protecting his own store. Her sophisticated vocabulary and legal knowledge only reinforced his suspicions that she was part of an organized criminal operation. "Don't try to intimidate me with legal jargon," Bradley snapped, his professional facade cracking completely. "I know exactly what you are and what you're doing here. You people think you can walk into any store and buy merchandise without consequences, but not on my watch." The phrase "you people" hung in the air like an accusation itself, loaded with implications that everyone present understood, despite Bradley's attempt to couch it in security terminology. Several customers exchanged uncomfortable glances while others nodded in agreement with what they perceived as necessary security measures. Kevin, the young sales associate, finally found his courage to speak up. "Mr. Hawkins, this customer asked really sophisticated technical questions about our products. She knew more about processor architectures and network protocols than most of our specialists. That doesn't seem like typical theft behavior." Bradley whirled on his own employee with barely contained fury. "Are you questioning my security assessment? She could be gathering technical information to defeat our anti-theft systems or planning sophisticated electronic theft. Advanced knowledge doesn't make someone legitimate, it makes them more dangerous." The public dressing down of Kevin sent a clear message to other staff members about the consequences of challenging Bradley's authority. Several employees who had been watching the confrontation suddenly found urgent tasks elsewhere in the store. Unwilling to risk similar treatment, Marcus Thompson cleared his throat diplomatically. "Mr. Hawkins, we need to be careful about the grounds for removing customers. Without evidence of actual policy violations or threatening behavior, we could face legal challenges." "I don't need legal advice from security personnel," Bradley replied. Curtly, "I need you to do your job and remove this individual from my store. I'm the regional manager, and I'm giving you a direct order." Jennifer Chun had been quietly observing the dynamics of the situation, and she noticed something that made her increasingly uncomfortable. The escalation seemed driven more by Bradley's personal reactions than by any objective security assessment. She'd witnessed enough actual theft attempts to know that genuine criminals rarely engaged in extended technical discussions with sales staff or remained calm when confronted by management. "Ma'am," Jennifer addressed Camille, "are you willing to voluntarily leave the store to de-escalate this situation?" Camille's response carried a weight that surprised everyone present. "Officer Chun, I appreciate your attempt to find a diplomatic solution, but I'm not leaving. I have every right to shop here, I've violated no policies, and I've engaged in no suspicious behavior. If Mr. Hawkins wants me removed, he'll need to have me arrested for trespassing, which means explaining to police officers why examining merchandise and asking technical questions constitutes criminal activity." The mention of police involvement changed the atmosphere immediately. Several customers began moving away more quickly, not wanting to be involved in a situation that might require witness statements. Bradley felt a moment of uncertainty calling police would create documentation and potentially draw corporate attention to his handling of the situation, but his pride and authority were now too invested in the confrontation to back down. "Fine," he declared, reaching for his radio again. "Security. Contact local police for assistance with trespassing removal. We have an uncooperative individual refusing lawful orders to leave the premises." As Bradley made the radio call, Camille finally pulled her smartphone from her messenger bag. The device was sleek and sophisticated, clearly a high-end model that looked somehow different from typical consumer phones, perhaps a custom or prototype version not yet available to the general public. "Before the police arrive," Camille said, her thumb hovering over the screen, "I think I should make that phone call I mentioned." Bradley was beyond caring about whatever bluff she was attempting. "Call whoever you want. Your lawyer, your accomplices, your family. It won't change the fact that you're being removed from this store for suspicious behavior." Camille's smile was slight, but carried an edge that made several observers shift uncomfortably. "Actually, I think I'll call my assistant first. She should probably know that I'm being detained at one of our locations." The phrase "one of our locations" was spoken so casually that it took a moment for the implications to register. Bradley's confident expression faltered slightly as his brain processed the unexpected wording. "What did you say?" he demanded, but Camille had already touched the screen and raised the phone to her ear. "Patricia? It's Dr. Washington. I'm currently at the Atlanta flagship Tech World location, and there seems to be a situation developing. Yes, the regional manager has called police to have me arrested for examining merchandise. I know, it's quite unprecedented. Could you conference in legal and have them contact the store immediately? Also, please notify James at corporate headquarters. He should probably know about this before it escalates further." As Camille spoke, Bradley felt the first cold touch of uncertainty. The calm authority in her voice, her casual mention of legal teams and corporate contacts, and most disturbing of all, her reference to Dr. Washington, suggested that this situation might be more complicated than he'd anticipated. "Who is Dr. Washington?" he asked loudly, interrupting her call. "What kind of scam are you trying to run?" Camille lowered the phone slightly, covering the speaker with her palm. "It's not a scam, Mr. Hawkins. Dr. Washington is my name, Camille Washington. Perhaps you should ask yourself why you assumed I was running a scam simply because I have a doctoral degree and professional contacts." The crowd of observers had grown larger, drawn by the increasingly dramatic confrontation. Several people were openly recording the interaction, and the whispered conversations among customers suggested that word was spreading throughout the store about the unfolding situation. Marcus Thompson was beginning to feel deeply uncomfortable about the entire scenario. His security training had taught him to recognize when situations were spiraling beyond appropriate responses, and this confrontation was raising red flags that had nothing to do with theft prevention. "Mr. Hawkins," Marcus said quietly, "maybe we should step back and reassess the situation before police arrive." "There's nothing to reassess," Bradley replied sharply, but his voice carried less conviction than before. "She's obviously trying to intimidate us with fake credentials and imaginary connections. It's a common tactic among sophisticated theft rings." Camille returned her attention to her phone call. "Patricia, could you also contact the local police department and let them know that Dr. Washington is cooperating fully with their investigation? I want to make sure there are no misunderstandings about my identity or intentions. Yes, please have them verify my credentials with corporate security. Thank you." As she ended the call, the silence in the electronics section was broken only by the ambient hum of electronic devices and the distant sounds of normal store operations. The confrontation had created a bubble of tension that seemed separate from the rest of Tech World's business activities. "Mr. Hawkins," Camille said, her voice returning to the calm professionalism she'd maintained throughout most of the encounter, "I'm going to give you one more opportunity to reconsider your actions. You've made serious accusations based on discriminatory assumptions. You've called police to arrest a customer for shopping while knowledgeable And you've created a public spectacle that reflects poorly on your store's commitment to customer service. Bradley's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. The growing crowd of observers, the recording of smartphones, and the uncertainty about this woman's true identity were combining to create exactly the kind of situation that corporate headquarters discouraged. But backing down now would mean admitting that his security assessment had been wrong, undermining his authority in front of staff and customers. "I don't care who you claim to be," Bradley declared, his voice carrying across the electronic section. "You engaged in suspicious behavior, refused to cooperate with security requests, and disrupted normal business operations. Those are facts, regardless of whatever story you're trying to sell." The sound of approaching sirens became audible through the store's background noise, adding urgency to an already tense situation. Police response time had been faster than expected, suggesting that either the situation was being treated seriously, or that officers had been nearby when the call came in. Camille checked her phone as it vibrated with an incoming message. Her expression shifted slightly as she read the screen, and for the first time during the entire confrontation, she looked genuinely concerned, not about her own situation, but about something else entirely. "Mr. Hawkins," she said, her voice taking on a tone of warning that hadn't been present before, "you're about to make this situation much worse for yourself. I strongly recommend that you speak with your corporate office before the police arrive." "I don't take recommendations from suspected criminals," Bradley replied, but his bravado was beginning to sound forced even to himself. As the police sirens grew louder and the crowd of observers continued to expand, the stage was set for a confrontation that would expose not just Bradley's discriminatory assumptions, but the entire corporate culture that had allowed such biases to flourish unchecked in TechWorld's retail environment. The automatic sliding doors of TechWorld Megacenter opened with their familiar electronic chime, but the figures who entered commanded attention in a way that no ordinary customers ever had. 3 individuals in perfectly tailored business suits moved with synchronized precision across the store's entrance, their polished leather shoes clicking against the concrete floor in a rhythm that seemed to announce their importance. The lead figure was a tall African-American woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into an elegant chignon, carrying herself with the unmistakable bearing of executive authority. Behind her walked 2 men, one a distinguished white gentleman with steel-gray temples and wire-rimmed glasses, the other a younger Asian-American professional whose quick, observant eyes were already cataloging every detail of the store's layout and the unusual crowd gathered in the electronics section. All 3 wore subtle but expensive accessories that spoke of corporate power: platinum watches, Italian leather briefcases, and communications devices that clearly weren't consumer-grade electronics. The woman leading this professional delegation was Patricia Sinclair, Senior Vice President of Corporate Operations for TechWorld Industries, the parent company that owned not just the TechWorld retail chain, but a vast network of technology suppliers, research facilities, and manufacturing partnerships that stretched across 3 continents. Her presence in any TechWorld location was unprecedented. Corporate executives of her level typically conducted business from glass-walled boardrooms in Manhattan, not retail floors in suburban Atlanta. Accompanying her was James Morrison, TechWorld's chief legal counsel, a man whose reputation for protecting corporate interests had been forged through decades of high-stakes litigation and regulatory negotiations. His gray suit was conservative but clearly bespoke, and the leather portfolio he carried contained legal documents that could reshape corporate policies or end careers with equal efficiency. The 3rd member of this unexpected executive team was Dr. Michael Chun, Director of Corporate Security and Risk Management, whose background in both private sector intelligence and federal law enforcement had made him indispensable to TechWorld's global operations. His analytical mind was already processing the scene before them, identifying potential liability issues and assessing the scope of whatever crisis had prompted this emergency intervention. As they approached the electronic section, Patricia's trained eyes immediately identified Dr. Camille Washington standing calmly near the high-end audio equipment, surrounded by a crowd of curious customers and increasingly nervous Tech World employees. The sight of her employer and colleague in such circumstances sent a flash of controlled anger across Patricia's professional features. "Dr. Washington," Patricia called out clearly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of Fortune 500 executives. The crowd immediately parted to allow the corporate delegation passage, sensing instinctively that these were not ordinary store visitors. The effect of Patricia's arrival on the assembled crowd was immediate and dramatic. Customers who had been recording the confrontation on their smartphones suddenly seemed uncertain whether they should continue documenting what was clearly becoming a corporate incident of significant magnitude. Tech World employees who had been watching from a safe distance now looked genuinely alarmed, recognizing that executive-level attention rarely brought positive outcomes for regional operations. Bradley Hawkins felt his stomach drop as he watched this professional delegation approach. The woman's commanding presence, the expensive suits, and most troubling of all, their obvious familiarity with the customer he'd been trying to have arrested, suggested that his security assessment might have been catastrophically wrong. "Patricia." Camille replied warmly, extending her hand to greet the executive who had clearly dropped everything to respond to her emergency call. "Thank you for coming so quickly. I'm afraid the situation has escalated beyond what I initially expected." "Dr. Washington, are you injured?" Patricia asked, her experienced eyes quickly assessing Camille for any signs of physical harm or distress. "Your message mentioned police involvement?" "I'm perfectly fine, though I've been accused of being a professional criminal conducting reconnaissance for a sophisticated theft operation," Camille replied with dry humor that didn't quite mask her underlying frustration. "The regional manager has called the police to have me arrested for examining merchandise and asking technical questions." James Morrison stepped forward, his legal training immediately focusing on potential liability issues. "Arrested? On what specific charges?" "Trespassing, apparently," Camille answered, gesturing toward Bradley, who was watching this exchange with growing horror. "Mr. Hawkins there seems to believe that knowledgeable shopping constitutes suspicious behavior warranting criminal prosecution." Dr. Chung's security background kicked in as he began documenting the scene with professional thoroughness. He noted the positions of security cameras, identified the Tech World employees present, and made mental notes about the customers who were recording the interaction. His experience in corporate crisis management told him that this situation had already crossed several red lines that would require immediate damage control. Patricia turned her attention to Bradley with the focused intensity of a laser. Her 40-year career in corporate leadership had taught her to identify management failures quickly and decisively, and everything about this situation screamed of discriminatory profiling and abuse of authority. "You must be Mr. Hawkins," Patricia said, her voice carrying the kind of polite coldness that every retail manager dreaded hearing from corporate headquarters. "I'm Patricia Sinclair, Senior Vice President of Corporate Operations for Tech World Industries. I understand you've had some concerns about Dr. Washington's shopping behavior." Bradley's mouth went dry as corporate titles and implications crashed over him like a wave. Senior Vice President meant C-suite level authority, the kind of executive power that could restructure entire regions with a single decision. If this customer really was Dr. Washington and warranted emergency intervention from corporate leadership, then his career was likely already over. Yes, ma'am," Bradley managed, his earlier confidence completely evaporating. There seemed to be suspicious behavior patterns that warranted security intervention according to our loss prevention protocols." "Suspicious behavior," Patricia repeated thoughtfully, as if tasting the words. "Could you be more specific about what Dr. Washington did that you found suspicious?" The crowd of observers pressed closer, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Several customers had resumed recording, realizing that whatever was unfolding was likely to have consequences far beyond a simple store security incident. Bradley felt trapped by his own earlier statements, forced to defend accusations that suddenly seemed obviously ridiculous when directed at someone who commanded this level of corporate attention. She was examining high-value merchandise very systematically, asking detailed technical questions, and spending an unusual amount of time without making purchases. Those are classic indicators of theft reconnaissance. Theft reconnaissance. James Morrison repeated, opening his leather portfolio to make notes that Bradley correctly assumed were not favorable. And you believe that Dr. Washington, who holds 3 doctoral degrees in electrical engineering and computer science, was conducting theft reconnaissance by asking technical questions about electronic products. The revelation of Camille's advanced degrees sent another ripple of shock through the assembled crowd. Doctoral degrees in engineering and computer science explained not just her technical knowledge but suggested a level of professional achievement that made Bradley's theft assumptions appear increasingly absurd. Dr. Chin had been quietly observing the security personnel during this exchange, noting their obvious discomfort with the situation. Officers Thompson and Chun, he addressed the security team directly. What was your assessment of the situation when you arrived? Marcus Thompson straightened to military attention, recognizing authority when he saw it. Sir, we found no evidence of criminal behavior or policy violations. The customer was cooperative and knowledgeable about store policies. We had concerns about the appropriateness of the trespassing request. You had concerns, Dr. Chun noted approvingly, but you were overruled by Mr. Hawkins' direct order? Yes, sir, Jennifer Chun confirmed, stepping forward. We recommended de-escalation, but Mr. Hawkins insisted on police involvement, despite the lack of actual policy violations. The sound of police sirens had grown steadily louder during this exchange, and now the distinctive whine of patrol car brakes announced the arrival of law enforcement. Through the store's large windows, customers could see 2 Atlanta Police Department cruisers pulling into the parking lot, their emergency lights creating red and blue flashes across the store's facade. Patricia checked her phone as it vibrated with an incoming message. Her expression tightened as she read the screen, and she looked up at Bradley with the kind of expression that ended careers. Mr. Hawkins, I've just received confirmation from our corporate legal team. They've been in contact with the Atlanta Police Department to clarify Dr. Washington's identity and status with our company. Her status? Bradley asked weakly, though he was beginning to understand that whatever Dr. Washington's status was, it was far more significant than he'd ever imagined. Dr. Camille Washington, Patricia announced clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the electronics section, is the Chief Technology Officer and Senior Vice President of Research and Development for TechWorld Industries. She is also a member of our board of directors and holds a 23% ownership stake in the company. She was conducting a routine quarterly assessment of our retail operations when you accused her of being a professional criminal. The silence that followed this revelation was absolute. Customers stood frozen with their smartphones still recording. Employees stared in horror at the magnitude of the situation, and Bradley felt the blood drain from his face as the full scope of his catastrophic misjudgment became clear. Chief Technology Officer, Senior Vice President, Board Member, 23% owner. Each title hit Bradley like a physical blow, destroying any remaining hope that this might be some elaborate misunderstanding that could be resolved with an apology and forgotten. She owns part of the company? Kevin asked in amazement, his voice breaking the stunned silence. Dr. Washington co-founded TechWorld Industries 22 years ago. James Morrison explained, his legal training providing precise details that would be crucial for documentation. She holds patents on 14 core technologies that power Our retail systems, including the inventory management software, customer relationship databases, and electronic security protocols that every Tech World location depends on daily. The irony was devastating. Bradley had accused the woman who designed Tech World security systems of trying to defeat them. He'd called police to arrest one of the company's owners for examining products she had helped develop. He'd treated the chief technology officer like a common criminal based on assumptions that were now revealed as discriminatory profiling of the most obvious and damaging kind. The automatic doors opened again as two Atlanta police officers entered the store. Officer Rodriguez was a 15-year veteran with extensive experience in retail disputes, while his partner Officer Kim was newer to the force but had already developed a reputation for thorough incident documentation. Both officers wore expressions of professional skepticism as they approached the crowd. Unusual situations involving corporate executives typically meant complicated paperwork and potential political sensitivities. Atlanta PD, Officer Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the authority of law enforcement. We received a call about a trespassing situation. Patricia stepped forward immediately, her corporate training taking over. Officers, I'm Patricia Sinclair, Senior Vice President of Tech World Industries. There's been a significant misunderstanding. The individual that Mr. Hawkins reported as trespassing is actually Dr. Camille Washington, our Chief Technology Officer and a member of our executive leadership team. Officer Rodriguez glanced between the assembled corporate executives and the obviously distressed regional manager, his experienced eye immediately recognizing that this was not a typical retail security call. Ma'am, are you saying there's no trespassing violation? Correct, Patricia replied firmly. Dr. Washington is a senior company executive conducting authorized business activities. She was examining our product displays and evaluating store operations as part of her official duties. There are no grounds for any criminal charges. Bradley watched helplessly as his world collapsed around him. The police officers were clearly treating the corporate executives as authorities in the situation, deferring to their explanation, rather than his earlier accusations. The crowd of customers was recording everything, creating documentation that would likely be shared across social media within hours. His own employees were staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to disapproval. Mr. Hawkins, Officer Kim addressed him directly. Can you explain why you believed criminal charges were appropriate in this situation? The question hung in the air like an accusation itself. How could Bradley explain that he'd assumed a well-dressed, knowledgeable customer was a criminal based on what exactly? Her systematic shopping approach, her technical questions, her reluctance to provide identification when she had every right to shop without being interrogated? I thought ... Bradley began, then stopped as he realized that any explanation would only make his discriminatory assumptions more obvious. She was acting suspiciously. Suspiciously how? Officer Rodriguez pressed his training in discrimination cases, making him alert to potential civil rights violations. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Bradley struggled to articulate suspicions that now seemed obviously based on racial profiling rather than legitimate security concerns. Every reason he could give, the systematic shopping, the technical knowledge, the professional demeanor, would only highlight how his assumptions had been shaped by bias rather than evidence. Dr. Washington stepped forward, her professional composure intact despite the ordeal she'd endured. Officers, I believe Mr. Hawkins made assumptions about my intentions based on my appearance rather than my actual behavior. I was simply evaluating our product selection and store operations, which is part of my executive responsibilities. The phrase "based on my appearance" created another moment of uncomfortable silence as everyone present understood the implications. Bradley had profiled a customer based on racial assumptions, and doubled down when challenged. ultimately calling police to arrest a company owner for shopping while black. Patricia's phone buzzed again, and she glanced at the screen with an expression that somehow managed to become even more serious. "Officers, our corporate legal team is prepared to file a complaint about this incident. Mr. Hawkins' actions have created potential liability for discriminatory treatment and false imprisonment." "False imprisonment?" Bradley asked frantically, suddenly realizing that he might face personal legal consequences beyond just losing his job. "You attempted to have Dr. Washington arrested without cause and threatened to have her physically removed from a store she partially owns," James Morrison explained with the precision of someone who'd prosecuted similar cases. "Those actions could constitute false imprisonment, discrimination, and potentially defamation given the public nature of your accusations." As the full magnitude of the situation became clear, Bradley felt his legs weaken. He'd gone from regional manager to potential defendant in less than 2 hours, all because he'd made assumptions about a customer based on prejudice rather than evidence. His 15-year career was over, his reputation destroyed, and he now faced potential legal action from one of the most powerful technology companies in America. The electronic hum of the store seemed louder now, as if the technology itself was bearing witness to this revelation of corporate power and the consequences of discriminatory assumptions in modern retail. The Atlanta Police Department's documentation process unfolded with methodical precision. As Officer Rodriguez completed his incident report on a tablet computer designed specifically for law enforcement use, the irony wasn't lost on Dr. Washington that the device he was using contained 3 of her patented technologies, including the secure data encryption protocol that protected sensitive police information from cyber attacks. Her fingerprints were quite literally embedded in the technology being used to document her wrongful treatment. Officer Kim had finished interviewing witnesses, speaking separately with Kevin, the sales associate, the security personnel Marcus Thompson and Jennifer Chun, and several customers who had recorded portions of the confrontation. The consistent narrative that emerged painted a clear picture of discriminatory treatment escalating to false accusations and wrongful detention attempts. "Dr. Washington," Officer Rodriguez addressed her with the professional respect accorded to someone of her corporate stature. "Based on our investigation, there are no grounds for any criminal charges against you. Your shopping behavior was entirely within normal parameters, and your examination of merchandise was consistent with someone conducting legitimate business evaluation." Patricia Sinclair nodded approvingly, her years of corporate crisis management experience telling her that proper police documentation would be crucial for the inevitable internal investigation and potential legal proceedings that would follow. "Officer Rodriguez, will your report reflect the discriminatory nature of Mr. Hawkins' actions?" "Ma'am, our report will document the facts of the incident," Rodriguez replied diplomatically. "Mr. Hawkins called police to report suspicious behavior that investigation revealed to be normal shopping activities. The report will note that the alleged suspicious behavior appeared to be based on assumptions rather than observed criminal activity." Bradley stood silently nearby, his face ashen as he watched his career and reputation being systematically dismantled through official documentation. Every police note, every witness statement, and every corporate executive's comment was creating a permanent record of his discriminatory profiling and abuse of managerial authority. James Morrison had been making extensive notes in his legal portfolio, documenting not just the immediate incident, but the broader pattern of corporate culture that had allowed such discrimination to occur. His experience in civil rights litigation told him that this case would likely become a watershed moment for retail discrimination, with implications extending far beyond one manager's career. "Mr. Hawkins," Morrison addressed him directly, his voice carrying the gravity of legal consequence. "Tech World Industries takes discrimination complaints extremely seriously. Your actions today have created significant legal exposure for our company, damaged our reputation, and subjected one of our senior executives to humiliation and false accusation. The corporate legal counsel's words were carefully chosen to establish a clear record of the company's official position while protecting TechWorld from potential lawsuits. By immediately distancing the corporation from Bradley's actions and characterizing them as unauthorized discrimination, Morrison was laying the groundwork for defending against any civil rights claims that might emerge from the incident. Dr. Michael Chun had completed his security assessment of the situation, and his findings were damning for Bradley's credibility as a loss prevention manager. Mr. Hawkins, your security protocols appear to be based on demographic profiling rather than behavioral assessment. Genuine theft prevention focuses on actions like concealment attempts, nervous behavior, or attempts to defeat security systems. Dr. Washington exhibited none of these indicators. The security expert's analysis was particularly devastating because it came from someone whose expertise in corporate loss prevention was internationally recognized. Chun's assessment would carry significant weight in any internal investigation or legal proceeding, effectively dismantling Bradley's claims that his actions were based on legitimate security concerns. Patricia checked her phone as another series of messages arrived from TechWorld's corporate headquarters in Manhattan. The incident was already generating attention at the highest levels of company leadership, with the CEO personally requesting updates and the board of directors scheduling an emergency session to address the discrimination and its potential impact on corporate reputation. Dr. Washington, Patricia said, her voice reflecting both professional concern and personal sympathy, the executive committee has authorized me to implement immediate corrective measures. Mr. Hawkins' employment with TechWorld Industries is terminated effective immediately and will be conducting a comprehensive review of our retail discrimination policies. The termination announcement sent shockwaves through the assembled TechWorld employees who had been watching the proceedings with growing anxiety. Regional managers were considered significant figures in the corporate hierarchy, and seeing one fired on the spot by executive leadership demonstrated the severity of the situation and the company's commitment to addressing discrimination. Bradley's knees buckled slightly as the reality of his termination hit home. 15 years of retail management experience, countless performance awards, and what he'd considered a successful career trajectory had been destroyed in a single afternoon by his own discriminatory assumptions and refusal to acknowledge his mistakes when given multiple opportunities to de-escalate. "Please," Bradley said desperately, his voice cracking with emotion. "I didn't know who she was. If I had known she was an executive, I never would have." "That's exactly the problem," Dr. Washington interrupted, speaking publicly for the first time since the corporate executives had arrived. Her voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority, the tone of someone accustomed to addressing corporate boards and technical conferences. "Your treatment of me shouldn't depend on my title or corporate position. Every customer deserves respect and dignity, regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived social status." The wisdom and grace of her response resonated powerfully with the crowd of observers, many of whom had been recording and would later share her words across social media platforms. Her refusal to accept special treatment based on her executive status, while clearly articulating the fundamental principle of equal dignity, struck many as the kind of leadership rarely seen in corporate America. Kevin, the young sales associate, who had tried to defend her earlier, stepped forward with obvious emotion. "Dr. Washington, I want to apologize for not speaking up more forcefully. I knew your questions were legitimate and your behavior was professional, but I was afraid of contradicting Mr. Hawkins." Camille's expression softened as she looked at the young employee who had shown courage despite obvious pressure to remain silent. "Kevin, you did speak up when it mattered most. That took integrity, and I appreciate your willingness to tell the truth even when it was difficult." Her gracious response to Kevin's apology demonstrated the kind of leadership character that had made her successful in corporate environments while highlighting the contrast with Bradley's authoritarian management style that had discouraged honest. Feedback from subordinates, Marcus Thompson and Jennifer Chun, the security personnel who had expressed concerns about the appropriateness of the trespassing request, approached Dr. Washington with professional respect. "Ma'am," Marcus said, "we want you to know that we recognize the situation was inappropriate, but we were overruled by management authority." "Your professional assessment was correct," Dr. Chun told them approvingly. Proper security training focuses on behavior analysis rather than demographic assumptions. Your instincts about the lack of criminal indicators were sound, and your concerns about the trespassing request showed good judgment. The validation from TechWorld's Director of Corporate Security would likely protect both officers from any negative consequences and might even lead to enhanced responsibilities in the company's revised security protocols. Their willingness to question inappropriate orders, even while ultimately following management directives, demonstrated the kind of professional integrity that corporations valued. Officer Kim had been quietly documenting the corporate response to the incident, noting how quickly executive leadership had mobilized to address the discrimination and implement corrective measures. Her report would reflect favorably on TechWorld's institutional response, while clearly establishing Bradley's actions as unauthorized and contrary to company policy. "Dr. Washington," Officer Rodriguez said, "do you wish to file charges against Mr. Hawkins for false imprisonment or making false statements to law enforcement?" The question created a moment of dramatic tension as everyone present waited to see how one of TechWorld's most powerful executives would respond to an opportunity for personal legal revenge against someone who had subjected her to public humiliation and discriminatory treatment. Camille considered the question thoughtfully, her pause demonstrating the careful deliberation that had made her successful in high-stakes corporate decision-making. "Officer Rodriguez, I believe Mr. Hawkins has already faced the most significant consequences through the loss of his career and professional reputation. My goal is not personal revenge, but ensuring that this kind of discrimination doesn't happen to other customers who might not have my resources or corporate connections." Her measured response impressed everyone present, including the police officers who had seen many discrimination victims choose personal litigation over systemic reform. Her focus on protecting future customers rather than punishing her tormentor demonstrated the kind of principled leadership that had earned her respect throughout the technology industry. James Morrison nodded approvingly at her decision while making notes about the legal implications. Dr. Washington's restraint in not pursuing individual charges doesn't preclude TechWorld from implementing policy changes to prevent similar incidents. We'll be conducting comprehensive discrimination training and revising our customer service protocols. The promise of systematic reform, rather than just individual punishment, suggested that the incident would have lasting positive impact beyond Bradley's termination. Corporate policy changes affecting thousands of employees and millions of customer interactions would address the root causes of discrimination rather than just its symptoms. Patricia addressed the assembled crowd of customers and employees with executive authority. TechWorld Industries sincerely apologizes for the discriminatory treatment that Dr. Washington experienced in our store today. This incident does not reflect our corporate values or our commitment to serving all customers with dignity and respect. The public apology was necessary for corporate reputation management, but it also served as an acknowledgement that the incident represented a failure of institutional culture rather than just individual misconduct. By taking corporate responsibility, Patricia was positioning TechWorld as an organization committed to learning from its mistakes. Furthermore, Patricia continued, we'll be implementing immediate policy changes to prevent similar incidents. All retail management personnel will receive enhanced training on unconscious bias, proper customer service protocols, and appropriate security procedures. will also establish new oversight mechanisms to ensure that discrimination complaints are handled promptly and effectively. The announcement of specific corrective measures demonstrated corporate commitment to systemic change while potentially protecting TechWorld from discrimination lawsuits by showing proactive efforts to address the underlying problems that had led to the incident. Dr. Washington's phone buzzed with a message that brought a slight smile to her face. "Patricia, I've just received confirmation that our quarterly board meeting next week will include a comprehensive review of retail discrimination policies. This incident will become a case study for improving our corporate culture." The transformation of personal humiliation into institutional learning opportunity demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that had made Dr. Washington successful in corporate leadership. Rather than allowing the discrimination to become just another unpleasant incident, she was leveraging it to create lasting positive change for TechWorld's millions of customers. As the police officers completed their paperwork and prepared to leave, Officer Rodriguez addressed the assembled crowd. "This incident demonstrates the importance of treating all individuals with respect and dignity, regardless of assumptions about their background or intentions. Discrimination has no place in retail environments or anywhere else in our community." The officer's closing statement provided official validation of the discrimination that had occurred while reinforcing the message that such behavior was both legally and morally unacceptable. His words would likely be included in the social media posts and news coverage that would emerge from the incident. Bradley stood alone as the corporate executives, police officers, and supportive employees clustered around Dr. Washington. His isolation was complete, professionally terminated, legally vulnerable, and morally condemned by his own actions. The price of his discriminatory assumptions had been catastrophic, destroying not just his career but his reputation and self-respect. The fluorescent lights continued their mechanical humming overhead. The electronic devices maintained their constant displays, and the store's normal operations gradually resumed around the edges of the confrontation area. But everything had changed in ways that would ripple through TechWorld's corporate culture and retail policies for years to come. 6 months later, the TechWorld Megacenter in Atlanta had become something of a pilgrimage site for retail industry professionals studying corporate transformation and discrimination prevention. The store looked physically unchanged, the same fluorescent lighting, the same product displays, the same polished concrete floors, but the atmosphere was fundamentally different. Training certificates hung in employee break rooms. Diversity and inclusion posters decorated administrative offices, and a new culture of respectful customer service had taken root throughout the organization. Dr. Camille Washington stood the very spot where Bradley Hawkins had first confronted her, but now she was surrounded by a group of TechWorld regional managers who had traveled from across the country for mandatory sensitivity training. The quarterly Washington Protocol sessions, as they'd become known throughout the company, used her experience as a case study in recognizing and preventing retail discrimination. The fundamental question, Dr. Washington addressed the assembled managers, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had characterized her response to discrimination, is not whether your customers look like they belong in your store. The question is whether your store deserves customers like them. The managers took notes diligently, understanding that their own career advancement now depended on demonstrating mastery of inclusive customer service principles. TechWorld's board of directors had made clear that discriminatory incidents would result in immediate termination, and the company's zero-tolerance policy had already claimed 3 additional managers who failed to internalize the new cultural standards. Marcus Thompson, now promoted to regional security director, stood nearby observing the training session. His military bearing remained unchanged, but his approach to loss prevention had evolved significantly since the incident. The security protocols he developed emphasized behavioral analysis over demographic profiling, focusing on actual suspicious actions rather than assumptions based on appearance. Dr. Washington, one of the managers, asked, "How do we balance security concerns with inclusive customer service? Some employees worry that being too welcoming might compromise theft prevention." Camille smiled at the question, recognizing an opportunity to address one of the most persistent misconceptions in retail security. Genuine security is enhanced by respectful treatment of all customers. When you profile based on demographics, you miss actual theft attempts while harassing innocent shoppers. Professional criminals rely on your biases to operate undetected. Her answer reflected months of collaboration with Dr. Michael Chun in developing new security training materials that had been adopted not just by tech world, but by retail chains across multiple industries. The Washington-Chun Protocol had become a gold standard for discrimination-free loss prevention, studied in business schools and law enforcement academies worldwide. Jennifer Chun, promoted to head of customer relations, had implemented feedback systems that allowed customers to report discriminatory treatment confidentially through QR codes posted throughout the store. The system generated monthly reports that tracked incidents by location, employee, and demographic patterns, creating data-driven accountability for inclusive service. "The technology we've developed here," Jennifer explained to the visiting managers, "doesn't just prevent discrimination, it rewards excellent inclusive service. Employees receive recognition and career advancement opportunities based on positive customer feedback across all demographic categories." The gamification of inclusive service had proven remarkably effective at changing employee behavior. Sales associates who once might have ignored or followed certain customers now competed to provide exceptional service to everyone. Knowing that their professional advancement depended on demonstrating inclusive excellence. Kevin Martinez, formerly just Kevin, the sales associate, had been promoted to assistant store manager and become something of a celebrity within tech world for his courage in defending Dr. Washington during the original incident. His story was featured in company newsletters and training materials as an example of how speaking up against discrimination could advance rather than harm one's career. "The hardest part wasn't knowing what was right," Kevin reflected during his portion of the training presentation. "It was finding the courage to speak up to authority. But Dr. Washington showed us that true authority comes from doing what's right, not from having the highest title." His words resonated particularly strongly with younger employees who often face similar pressures to remain silent when witnessing inappropriate behavior. The company's new whistleblower protections and Courage Awards program had created safe channels for employees to report discrimination without fear of retaliation. The broader retail industry had taken notice of TechWorld's transformation. Harvard Business School had developed a case study around the incident, and Dr. Washington regularly spoke at conferences about converting crisis into opportunity for organizational growth. Her approach, focusing on systemic change rather than individual punishment, had become a model for corporate leaders dealing with discrimination scandals. The goal was never to destroy one person's career, Dr. Washington explained to a journalist from Retail Management Weekly, but to save thousands of customers from experiencing what I experienced. Bradley Hawkins was a symptom of broader cultural problems that required institutional solutions. The interview, conducted in the same electronics section where the confrontation had occurred, would later win a journalism award for its exploration of corporate responsibility and redemption. The reporter noted the transformation visible throughout the store, from employee behavior to customer demographics to the overall atmosphere of genuine welcome. Patricia Sinclair had leveraged the incident to spearhead industry-wide changes in retail discrimination policies. Her testimony before congressional committees on retail discrimination had led to proposed federal legislation requiring bias training for all customer-facing employees in large retail chains. The Sinclair Standards for Inclusive Retail had been adopted by over 200 companies nationwide. Corporate leadership often waits for discrimination lawsuits to force change, Patricia told the congressional subcommittee. But proactive companies recognize that inclusive practices aren't just morally right, they're profitable. When customers feel welcome and respected, they spend more money and become loyal advocates for your brand. The economic argument for inclusion had proven particularly persuasive with corporate executives, who might have been resistant to change based purely on ethical considerations. TechWorld's quarterly reports showed measurably improved customer satisfaction scores, increased sales diversity, and enhanced employee retention following the implementation of inclusive policies. Dr. Washington's personal story had also inspired changes beyond the corporate world. She'd established the Washington Foundation for Retail Justice, which provided legal support for discrimination victims who lacked the resources or corporate connections to fight back against unfair treatment. The foundation had already handled over 400 cases nationwide. Not everyone who experiences retail discrimination is a company executive with lawyers on speed dial, she explained at the foundation's inaugural fundraising dinner. Most victims are ordinary people who deserve the same dignity and respect that everyone should receive when spending their hard-earned money. The foundation's legal victories had created precedents that made it easier for discrimination victims to seek justice while encouraging retailers to improve their practices voluntarily rather than face costly litigation. Several major chains had proactively adopted TechWorld's inclusive policies after consulting with the foundation. Bradley Hawkins had largely disappeared from public view following his termination, though occasional reports suggested he'd struggled to find employment in retail management due to the widespread coverage of his discriminatory behavior. His LinkedIn profile remained blank, and former colleagues reported that he'd moved out of Atlanta and was working in an unrelated field under difficult financial circumstances. Some observers argued that his punishment had been excessive, that losing a 15-year career over a single incident, however egregious, represented disproportionate consequences. Others maintained that his behavior exemplified exactly the kind of systemic discrimination that required dramatic consequences to deter future incidents. "I don't take pleasure in Mr. Hawkins' difficulties," Dr. Washington said when asked about her former tormentor, "but I also can't ignore the hundreds of customers who have contacted me with similar stories." His case became a symbol because discrimination is so pervasive that dramatic examples are needed to create meaningful change. The human cost of discrimination had become a central theme in Dr. Washington's advocacy work. She regularly shared emails and letters from customers who described being followed, questioned, or humiliated in retail establishments based on their race, religion, accent, or appearance. Their stories provided powerful testimony about the widespread nature of retail discrimination. Officer Rodriguez had become something of an expert on retail discrimination cases within the Atlanta Police Department, leading training sessions for fellow officers on recognizing false reports based on discriminatory profiling. His handling of the TechWorld incident was considered a model for how law enforcement should respond to discrimination complaints. The key is recognizing when suspicious behavior reports are actually based on bias rather than legitimate security concerns, Rodriguez explained to his fellow officers. Real criminals don't typically engage in extended technical discussions with sales staff or remain calm when confronted by management. His training programs had been adopted by police departments in 12 states, helping law enforcement distinguish between genuine security concerns and discriminatory complaints. The protocols he developed had prevented numerous wrongful arrests. While protecting actual crime victims, the social media coverage of the original incident had also evolved into ongoing advocacy campaigns. The hashtag shopping while black had generated thousands of stories from customers who'd experienced similar discrimination, creating a national conversation about retail bias that extended far beyond TechWorld's corporate transformation. Social media gave victims a voice when traditional complaint systems failed them, explained Dr. Sarah Chen, a communications professor who'd studied the incident's viral impact. Dr. Washington's story became a catalyst because it showed that discrimination affects people at every level of society, including those with the power to fight back. The viral nature of the story had also created accountability mechanisms that extended beyond legal or corporate remedies. Managers who engaged in discriminatory behavior now faced potential social media exposure that could destroy their careers. Regardless of corporate protection or legal immunity, TechWorld's stock price had initially dropped following the incident, as investors worried about potential lawsuits and boycotts. However, the company's proactive response and genuine cultural transformation had ultimately enhanced its reputation and market value. Consumer surveys showed increased brand loyalty among diverse demographics, translating into measurable revenue growth. The best crisis management is authentic change, not just public relations, explained corporate communications expert Dr. Michael Torres, who'd studied TechWorld's response strategy. Companies that use discrimination incidents as opportunities for genuine improvement often emerge stronger than before the crisis occurred. The Atlanta store had become a testing ground for innovative inclusion technologies, including AI-powered systems that could detect patterns of discriminatory treatment by analyzing customer interaction data. The systems flagged potential bias issues before they escalated into major incidents, allowing for proactive intervention and coaching. Technology should serve justice, not perpetuate bias, Dr. Washington explained while demonstrating the new systems to visiting executives. These tools help managers identify and address discrimination before it damages customers and creates legal liability. The innovations developed at the Atlanta location were being rolled out across TechWorld's entire chain, with plans to license the technology to other retailers interested in improving their inclusive practices. The potential market for bias prevention technology was enormous, representing both social progress and profitable business opportunity. As the 6-month anniversary of the incident approached, Dr. Washington reflected on the transformation that had occurred throughout TechWorld and the broader retail industry. The changes went far beyond policy updates and training programs. They represented a fundamental shift in how businesses thought about customer relationships and corporate responsibility. The most important lesson, she told a gathering of corporate executives at the annual Retail Leadership Summit, is that true leadership means creating environments where everyone can thrive. When we exclude people based on prejudice, we diminish ourselves and our organizations. Her closing words at the summit delivered in the same calm, authoritative voice that had commanded respect during her darkest moment of discrimination, captured the essence of what had become known throughout the business world as the Washington Principle, that dignity, respect, and inclusion weren't just moral imperatives, but practical necessities for any organization seeking long-term success. The fluorescent lights in that Atlanta tech world still hummed with mechanical persistence. The electronic displays still cycled through their promotional content, and customers still browsed the latest technological innovations. But something fundamental had changed in that space and in thousands of retail locations across America, a recognition that every person who walked through those doors deserved to be treated, not as a potential threat or unworthy visitor, but as a valued human being whose dignity was worth protecting and whose business was worth earning through genuine respect. The story that began with assumptions and discrimination had evolved into a legacy of transformation, proving that even the most painful incidents of bias could become catalysts for meaningful change when met with courage, wisdom, and an unwavering commitment to justice for all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.